Buenos días, buenas tardes,
Hello, good
gracias
morning,
por
good afternoon,
participar
and thank you
en
for
este
joining us today for
webinar
this
de
webinar
CICA y FIC,
organized by CICA and
Repensando
FIIC,
los PPPs, el
Rethinking
cambio de
PPPs, the
mentalidad y
mindset and
habilidades
skills
necesarias
for
para
successful
tener
projects.
proyectos exitosos. Para quienes no nos conocen de
For those
cerca,
who
CICA es la
don't know
Confederación
about us so
Internacional de Asociaciones de
well, CICA
Constructores
is the International
o la
Association of
Asociación
Builders
Mundial de la
Federations
Construcción.
or the World
La
Construction
FIC es la
Federation,
Federación
and FIIC
Interamericana de la
is the
Industria de la
Inter-American
Construcción,
Federation of the
que
construction
reúne a
industry,
las cámaras de
which
construcción
gathers the construction
de los
chambers
18 países de
of
Latinoamérica.
18 countries in
En
Latin
forma
America.
conjunta
Jointly,
organizamos
we have organized
cada tanto
a series
reuniones
of
que
webinars
hacen al interés de las
that pertain to
empresas
the
o de las
interest of
cámaras que
companies or
forman parte
chambers
de
that are
CICA
part
y de
of
FIC.
CICA and
En
FIIC.
este caso,
In this case,
contamos con la
we
participación
have the
de destacados
participation of
especialistas en el campo de los
first-line
PPPs y
specialists in the
vamos
field of
muy
PPPs.
rápidamente
And
a
we will
hablar
now
sobre
swiftly
qué podemos
start
hacer para
discussing what
mejorar
we can do
el
to
desempeño
improve the
de los
performance
PPPs en
of
la
PPPs
provisión de la infraestructura que nuestros
for
países
infrastructure,
necesitan.
for the infrastructure that our
Creo que
countries
todos
need.
nosotros
I believe
coincidimos que
that
la
we all agree
inversión en
on the
infraestructura
fact that
es importante,
investment
que
in
es un
infrastructure
prerequisito
is
para el
important, and it's
crecimiento y el
also a
desarrollo de los
prerequisite
países.
for the growth and
Lamentamos
development of
también que en
countries.
muchos casos esa inversión sea
We also
escasa
regret that
y que
this
incluso por
investment
falta
is
de
sometimes scarce,
mantenimiento
and
se
also due to the lack
deteriore
of
el
maintenance,
capital
the
de los
capital
países.
stock of countries gets
Muchos
deteriorated.
de nuestros países cuentan
Many
con
countries
recursos
in the
humanos,
region do
recursos
have the human
técnicos
resources, the
y
technical
empresariales
resources,
como para
and the business
poder
organizations
ejecutar esas
so that they can, in
obras
fact,
necesarias.
do the necessary works.
Tradicionalmente hemos pensado que
Traditionally,
ello se
we have
debe
thought that
fundamentalmente a la
this
falta de
problem is due to the
financiamiento.
lack of financing.
Sin embargo,
Nonetheless,
existen
there
otros
are
factores
other
que
factors
afectan la
that
concreción de los
affect
proyectos
the concretion
y
of infrastructure
eso
projects,
explicaría por
and
qué
that would explain
disminuye la cantidad de
why
proyectos que se
the amount
concretan
of
a pesar de
projects
que hay
finished
abundancia
is
de recursos
declining
financieros
despite
en el
the
mundo.
abundance of financial
Sin
resources in the
duda, la
world.
solución debe
Without a
provenir de
doubt,
todos los
the
actores.
solution must come from all
Ninguno es
actors
suficiente
combined.
por sí
No
solo. El
actor
aporte
is
privado es
sufficient on its
necesario,
own. The
pero no es
private contribution is
suficiente.
sufficient,
El
is
aporte
necessary but
estatal
not
es
sufficient. The
imprescindible
state's
en
contribution is
aquellos
quintessential
proyectos donde el
in those
beneficio
projects
no
where
es
the benefit
monetizable por el
is
intermediario
not
privado. Y los
something that's
organismos
profit
financieros
for the
internacionales
private investor.
están dispuestos a ayudar,
And
pero no es
international
suficiente.
financial institutions are willing to help, but that
Información
is also
pública
not
del Banco
sufficient.
Mundial
Public
muestra que la
information from the World Bank
participación
shows that
privada en
private infrastructure
infraestructura, los
participation,
PPI,
or
eh,
PPI,
se han reducido desde
have
2010-2012,
reduced since
en
2012,
particular en los
2010,
países de
2012,
ingresos
especially
medios y
in
bajos.
low and middle income countries.
Los compromisos han caído quizá
Global
30%
PPI commitments
desde
have fallen by
2015, algo
30%
más
approximately
desde
since
2012,
2015,
y eso está
slightly
muy
more since
lejos de lo
2012.
requerido
That is
para
far from what
reducir
is
la
needed
brecha
to
de
reduce the global
infraestructura
infrastructure gap
en el mundo y aún más lejos de
in
lo
the world,
necesario para
and even
cumplir con
farther
los
away from
objetivos
what
de
is needed to
desarrollo
meet the
sostenible de
sustainable
la ONU.
development goals.
Además, esa inversión se encuentra muy
Furthermore, that
concentrada en algunos
investment is
sectores:
highly concentrated in
energía
certain sectors,
70%,
energy
transporte
70%,
30%,
transport
y
30%,
también distribuida en
and
forma
also
desigual en las
distributed in
distintas
an uneven
regiones del
way
mundo.
in the different regions
Pero
of the
quizá lo
world.
grave es que
But the most severe
eh,
problem is
lo
probably that
comprometido en proyectos
what has been
PPI
committed
en
in PPI
relación al PBI
projects
de la
in
región
connection to
es
the region's
absolutamente
GDP
insuficiente para
is
sostener
absolutely
el
insufficient
crecimiento e
to sustain
incluso para
growth
evitar el
or even
deterioro.
to prevent
En el caso de
deterioration.
Latinoamérica,
In the case of Latin
las
America,
inversiones comprometidas por PPI son
investments
del
by PPI
0,36% del
committed are
PBI de la región, cuando
0.36% of the region's
es
GDP,
aceptado que se requiere
when
alrededor
it is
del
accepted
4% del
that
PBI
around
para
4% of
sostener el
GDP is
crecimiento.
required to sustain growth.
Además, la situación se ha
Furthermore, the
complicado.
situation
Han
has
aparecido nuevos
become more
riesgos.
difficult. New
Los
risks have
riesgos
emerged. The
geopolíticos
geopolitical
son cada
risks
día mayores.
are
Esto afecta
growing
también
day in, day
la
out, and this
situación.
is also affecting
Particularmente los
the
fondos
situation,
externos
especially
huyen hacia la
external
calidad
funds
y rehuyen
turn to
riesgos
quality
geopolíticos.
and far away from
Ante
geopolitical
este
risks.
panorama, escucharemos la
Facing this
posición
landscape,
y la
we
opinión de
will
tres
hear the words
expertos
and opinions of
que
three
desde
specialists
distintos puntos
who, from
de
different
especialidad,
areas of
van a
expertise,
ayudarnos a
will
comprender la
help us
situación y
understand
ojalá que
the
nos
situation and
ayuden a superar.
hopefully help us also
Muchas gracias
overcome
a
this
todos por
situation.
su
Thank you so
participación,
much,
gracias a la
everyone, for
audiencia por
participating.
participar.
Thank you
Michelle,
to the audience
adelante,
for
por favor.
listening in. Michelle, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando. As you rightfully mentioned, there are plenty of helps, documents, books, guides coming from multilateral development banks to explain how to deal with public-private partnerships, or P3s, as they are named in the United States. They usually contain recommendations on the administrative setup to be organized, the creation of legal entities like PPP units, the legal provisions to be included accordingly in contracts, the financial clauses, and so on. But today we will focus more on something that is maybe less visible, less technical, but which appears, however, to be essential if one wants to implement successful PPPs in the long run. And this is precisely what is mentioned in the title of our webinar, the mindset and skills that are required both from public and private entities. For this journey, as Fernando said, we are blessed with a great panel. Let me introduce our three speakers very quickly. I will try not to lose too much time. Cesar Quiroz. Cesar is an old friend. We met exactly 40 years ago when I was seconded to the World Bank for a one-year period. His assignment with the World Bank lasted for much longer. And eventually, as he retired, he was in the position of highways advisor for the World Bank. Cesar has retired now, but he still gives lectures on PPPs at the International Law Institute. And he will draw on his vast experience to describe the main problems that may be encountered with PPPs in developing countries. Javier Pascual is Director, Business Development and Pre-Construction at Ferrovial Construction, US and Canada. He has worked for about 20 years in North America, so he witnessed the recent growth of P3 contracts there, and he will share with us his knowledge of P3s in the United States. And last but not least, Doris Chevalier is a civil engineer who participated actively in the drafting of the UNECE's standard on public-private partnerships and concession legal framework in support of the Sustainable Development Goals. What is UNECE? It's an acronym for United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. But in the particular field of PPPs, UNECE is the leader at UN level on this important topic, and Doris will tell us more about the role of UNECE and this international standard. Just a couple of recommendations for the participants. Please put your computer on mute if you do not have to speak. Use the chat to ask specific questions. We will endeavor to answer them as precisely as possible. And during the Q&A session, we plan a Q&A session at the end. Just raise your hand and we will give you the floor but please, only for short questions, not for speeches. Now, without further ado, I will give the floor to our first speaker, César. I hope you can manage. I'm sure you can manage with your PowerPoint presentation. Go ahead, César.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michel, for a kind introduction. Always a pleasure. You have invited me, and Fernando have invited me before, so thanks to CICA, the World Construction Association, and the FIIC. Fernando, thank you very much for inviting me again to join one of your webinars. It's always a good pleasure to be together. Let me briefly review some key issues regarding PPP history. History can always tell us a little bit. There's always lessons coming from projects implemented not only a few decades ago, but also centuries ago. Challenges in the implementation of PPPs in developing countries. A brief summary. Let me try to change my slide. No, I have to share.
Share. You have to
Yes.
share.
Okay, share. And now, can you see my slide?
That's okay.
Yeah, okay, great. Let me try to change. Do I change it? Oh, yes, can you see the second slide?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. So I have a quick lesson I think I'm learning. And so these are the main topics we will be speaking about. And let me start with a view from a new World Bank publication on infrastructure foundations, from current assets to future growth. Fernando, you mentioned in your introduction about the issues, but also the solutions. And I would recommend that this new publication has a lot of the issues and a lot more on the solutions to the infrastructure gap and to the infrastructure problems that we have seen in different projects. So one finding in this new report is that infrastructure is essential for economic growth, job creation, social inclusion, and resilience. So this is not new. We've been talking about it for years, but it's now put in a more scientific way. And so as public and concessional funds are limited, developing countries need to attract more private financing. And PPP is a way to do it. So the solution that PPP can help, we knew before, but now in a more strategic way, it's described and defended in this new publication of the World Bank. I have a couple of slides, exactly 2 slides trying to summarize the world history of PPP. That task, as everybody knows, is absolutely impossible. But I'll do it anyway. In 2 slides, the world history of PPP. It starts in some road tolling in Susa, Babylon, on the Susa-Babylon highway, under the regime of Ashurbanipal in the 7th century before Christ. In ancient Rome, emperors granted concessions for ports, for roads, and other amenities. In medieval Europe, and Michel and I have discussed several times about this, right, Michel? Even the remaining of those infrastructure in different parts of France, rulers delegated infrastructure projects, for example, granted long-term rights over fortified towns in the 12th and 13th centuries. By 16th, 17th century, sovereigns contracted, again, build private sector to build canals and other infrastructure. Concession-style financing soared in the 19th century. European and US governments awarded franchises and for different forms of infrastructure, including railways. And more recently, by mid-20th century, many countries nationalized railways, particularly following the Great Depression, and achieved and established state-owned enterprises, state-owned firms, instead of involving directly the private sector. But then, from the 1980s, fiscal pressures and a new preference for market-based methods revived PPPs, particularly now with Margaret Thatcher in the UK, in France, Spain, and the US, and several developing countries. So interest in PPPs surged globally since the 2000s. Fiscal constraints, infrastructure gaps, private capital availability, value for money and expertise, support of multilateral agencies such as the World Bank and the regional development banks in donor countries. So this is a brief history in 2 slides of the PPPs. Some example, the Maysville, on the left, the Maysville Turnpike in the US around 1830. And, I don't know if you can see my marker here. On the left side, when I point to the marker, can you see that I'm pointing to the left side of the slide, or the slide on the left?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So this here is the toll rate. So the table, now, today, if you go to some roads in Europe, in several developing countries, in the US, you see a table of the toll rates. Okay, in 1830, the Maysville Turnpike had this table of toll rates on the side. And the Métropolitain Parisien, Paris, France, 1898, a concession to build the Metropolitan, the Metro in France, in Paris. Having said that, let me provide a quick definition. There are several definitions of PPP. I usually refer to this one, published by the World Bank and the other multilateral development institutions worldwide, which they agreed on that PPP is a long-term contract between a public authority, the public partner, and a private partner, the concessionaire. Usually the concessionaire, I think except in the UK, where the word concessionaire is not very much used, I believe, and the provision of a public asset or service in which the private party bears significant risks and management responsibilities. So it's a way of the public sector, of the government, the implementing agencies, to transfer risks and management responsibilities to the private sector. Remuneration is linked to performance to some extent, because even Adam Smith, a few centuries ago, said that if you don't really keep an eye on the road, maybe the concessionaire could continue charging tolls and not doing a good job in patching potholes. But except for that, yes, usually remuneration is linked to the performance of the infrastructure delegated to the private sector. A little bit, I think we are all familiar, but a little bit of initials. D stands for design, build or rehabilitate is B, finance F, operate O, maintain M, and then if we combine those letters with, for example, when Margaret Thatcher launched the PFI program in the UK in the 1980s, all the contracts, all the PPP contracts were called DBFO, Design, Build, Finance, Operate. So combining those letters, we have different types of PPP projects. How to fund a PPP project? So I think if we look really close, there are only 3 ways to fund. First is user pays. Second, government pays. So the concessionaire, the private partner in charge of building, operating the facility, he will receive money from the government. And third is hybrid, with the source of revenues to the private sector is both the government and the users. I tried to put in this slide all these combinations. And I tried to keep it simple. I could add, for example, shadow tones, which I didn't include because I would require another tone of or hue of red, and I didn't have it. So I use only two tones of red, and they represent, the red color represent revenues coming to the concessionaire from the government. And the blue on the left side is represents revenues coming to the concessionaire from the users of the facility. If it's a road, the toll roads, the toll rate, the toll collection. If it's hydropower, megawatt per let's say dollars per megawatt delivered, for example. And so from left to right, we have a complete user fees, 100% of the revenue coming from the private sector, from the users. And on the extreme right, availability payments, 100% of the revenues to the concessionaire coming from the public sector, from the government. And the nuances in between. A comparative analysis. The ways to fund a PPP illustrate the critical relationship between project structure. Is it a user pay? Is it a government pays? Risk allocation and financial sustainability. For example, if you award a contract, it's a toll road, and the tolls have to be very high rates to attract the private partner, then you may have very little traffic, very little demand because of elasticity. So this is risk sharing. There are pros and cons for each method, where to combine. Each project is a particular case. So subsidy mechanisms play a vital role in achieving financial closure and sustainability when revenue from users, like tolls, are insufficient to attract private partners. I took this picture a little while ago, more precisely, when I joined the World Bank in 1986. In June, my first mission to Africa for the World Bank. And I found in Ghana, between Akomadan and Kumasi, on this main north-south road in Ghana, I found this one-man contractor. It's not only in Ghana, in Brazil, even in Chile, I have seen, and in several other countries in Africa, this has happened. And so the man goes there, he puts some sand, some dirt in the pothole, and the drivers and the passengers in buses, they throw him some money. And I spoke with him. He said that's how he sent his children to school. So he gets his revenue from the users who are not required to pay, but they voluntarily give some tips to the one-man, so-called one-man contractor. So I like to use this as a simple way to show that users are willing to pay if they are receiving the benefits of the improvements with their money. In developing countries, investments in 2024 reached just over $100 billion, an increase of 16% from 2023 and 20% from the past average of the past 5 years, which means tremendous impact of COVID-19. This was the first time PPI, public-private infrastructure investment, had exceeded the $100 billion threshold since COVID-19. 2025 data is still being analyzed, so I'll stop in 2024 and show a few numbers. Too many numbers there. Let's focus on the first two columns. What is understood by sector here is the 6 World Bank regions: EAP, East Asian Pacific, ECA, Europe and Central Asia, LAC, Latin American Caribbean, Middle East and North Africa, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And let's see the PPI, private investments, or basically PPP contracts in $1 billion in 2024. East Asia with 57 billion, the highest, and followed by Latin America, 21.9, $22 billion, and in other regions. So as Fernando mentioned in your introduction, Fernando, there is in fact a good imbalance throughout the world in terms of investments. And okay, I'll not go into detail, but the numbers will be there. PPP investments in 2015 to 2024. We see the curve here. I don't know if my ponte or marker will come here, but this is number of projects, and this in the blue is investments in $1 billion. So the 100 billion threshold is about here, and just above 100 billion in 2024. And you see a tremendous impact of COVID in 2020 and 2021. Transport total. A few numbers about the transport. All of this can be accessed if you follow the links in the bottom of the slides. And transport total in 2024, $2.5 billion, 38 projects account for 20% of all the private investments. So transport has a significant, substantial 20%, but is not the highest. Usually energy has been the highest area where PPPs have been invested. Roads, 14.6, has been always the highest component under transportation. Roads, 14.6 billion in 2024, 19 projects. Brazil, 4.6 billion. Colombia, 3.3 billion, led road investments worldwide. Railways, 1.5 billion, including a large project in Angola. In ports, 1.8 billion, the largest in Uruguay in 2024. Ports, 1.8 billion, the largest in Uruguay. I have here airports, 2.7 billion, the largest in Dominican Republic. E-charging stations, 91 million across 2 projects in Bulgaria and India. In terms of risks, so private finance introduces performance incentives and can help mitigate inefficiencies such as corruption. Mitigate. I think that it's very difficult to say that it could eliminate, but mitigate is the key word here, such as corruption, delays, and white elephant projects so big that they're not really needed by society, by the public. And private partners bring innovation, life cycle cost, and all of that can help reduce costs. However, PPPs are vulnerable to governance and transparency issues. Renegotiations have been frequent, particularly in developing countries, of PPP projects, and that exposes projects to corruption. And let me provide a quick example. Of a risk allocation and exposure to corruption. The Abreu e Lima refinery built years ago in the state of Pernambuco in Brazil. The main contractor or the branch had obtained contracts through competitive bidding, but they would reduce, shrink their price proposal during the bidding to win the contract, but later renegotiated to increase in favor of the firm, to increase the rates and the payments. So the refinery contract was awarded in 2005 for $2.5 billion to be completed in 2011. Its design was altered several times, leading to successive contractual amendments. The refinery started operation in 2014, so 3 years behind the schedule, at about half the design capacity, and a cost of 20 billion. if you divide 20 billion by 2.5 initial cost, you have 8 times increase, or 700%. Principles of risk sharing. I think we have talked about it, and most of you certainly heard. Efficient PPP contracts allocate risks to the party best able to manage them at the lowest cost. And that's how you can lower costs in PPPs. So there's a continuum of risk transfer from the traditional procurement to intermediate arrangements depending on the forms of contract, like performance-based contracts, for example, OPBRC, output and performance-based road contracts, shadow tolls, availability payments, BOT, and BOO. BOO is where the private sector owns the right of way. They own the terrain and they build the infrastructure on that terrain. That's the build, own, operate type of concession. Some reflections, and this comes, and thanks, Michelle. We had several discussions before I prepared this slide, and I tried to summarize what we discussed and what other colleagues have contributed. So when opting for projects structured as user pays, owners, the client, the employer, the government, may unrealistically expect that once PPP contract has been awarded, they would have few or no responsibilities. The user will pay, and they then, okay, that contract is done. I don't have to worry for that. If the concession is a 30-year concession or a 99-year concession, we have several examples of 99-year concessions in the world. During that period, then if I'm the government, I will not worry about it. That's absolutely not true. Okay, so likewise, a concessionaire who is awarded the government pays is a mindset that may lead to disasters. And on the other side, on the side of the private sector, under a government pays, so I'm the private sector. I don't have to worry about the users. I'm doing my job, and the government will always pay. Okay, that's good. You can think, but watch with your mindset regarding that, because there have been cases where the government does not pay. Sad, yes, but it happens. So, and that has given origin to guarantees provided the pioneers, the World Bank, but other today many other institutions and multilateral development institutions provide also guarantees, and that would give assurance to the private sector that the payment would be made. Let me use
excuse me, Cesar. Could you speed up a little bit because you're driving late now?
Oh, sorry. Okay. Thank you, Michelle. I'm really about to finish. But a cuento. Let me tell you this cuento, a short story by Monterosso, which may help owners and concessionaires to set more balanced expectations. Quando despertou, el dinossauro todavía estava aí. When she awoke, the dinosaur was still there. And that happens in a concession. It's like a wedding. It's a long-term contract. And selection of the good and proper concessionaire is very, very essential. So spend some time in doing the right choice. And I'll stop here, Michelle. Thank you very, very much. Thanks for all.
Okay. Thank you very much, Cesar. Maybe you have to stop sharing your presentation. Okay. And now I would gladly give the floor to Javier to talk about his experience in the United States. It's fascinating because I would say that 2 decades ago, PPPs were not that many in North America, but it has picked up.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm guessing you all can see my screen with the presentation.
Excellent.
Perfect. So thank you, and thank you, CICA and FICC for inviting me. I will probably start from the end on my presentation, just throwing a few concepts there when we talk about proven success or solving necessities or socioeconomical development, risk alignment, or adapting framework. Those are concepts that historically have never been associated with P3s. They were not in the same conversation of a P3, but the goal of my short presentation and conversation is to really prove and explain why those concepts are right now the foundations of the P3, and they're really important for what a P3 is right now. So with that, again, I'm Javier Pascual, and I've been working in the US for 20 years, as it was said before, and I want to use the US as the sandbox for my presentation because really it's a great market. It has grown a lot, and there's two main reasons for that. One is for using the Ferrovial as the example. One is Ferrovial has been in the US for 20 plus years. We've been doing construction here, and we've been involved in P3s for all this time. We're the leading company when it comes to managed lanes projects. We have 6 assets right now in development. We've invested more than 12 billions in projects and built around 20 billions in construction. So we live all this cycle of the P3s. We suffer them, we see them, and more important, we help the owners and the DOTs and the different players to really improve in the P3 arena. And also the other aspect of the US is it has from a market point of view, it has very developed states and very undeveloped states when we talk about P3s. I mean, out of the 50 states in the US, only 40 has P3 legislation, and out of those 40, only 30-ish has any sort of P3 project. So really, you have states that are very mature, very developed, they really know how to work with P3s, states that are being more active, states that are emerging on the P3s, and states that really doesn't want to have a P3. And all of that within the same country and within the same framework really helps on understanding what are the levers that you have to push and what are the things that you have to change in rethinking these new P3s. So again, as I said, the beauty of the US is we have shift from trying to prove a model when it talks to P3 to really delivering at the scale. The amount of projects and the size of the projects and the different type of projects really are right now what we have here. We went from a niche market, and as Carlos was explaining before, to a market that it's a mainstream. Now, more states and more coming from the federal government, they're required to P3 to be considered as a main delivery method, at least to analyze whether or not it makes sense to do a P3. That's becoming because owners are more and more sophisticated. There are more expectations on how the process has to go in terms of transparency and community, and we'll touch on a few of those things. And they're more complex. So you have to improve, you have to have more innovation, you have to consider the performance life cycle. So it really has come a long way from the old P3s, and it's getting more and more to a sophisticated method. So even though the webinar is called Rethinking the P3s, I think we can say in some of these places in the US, we have been rethinking on P3s for the last few years. And there has been a big shift in mindset and skills. and it's proving on the projects that we have right now. But when we talk about where we have been rethinking P3s, I was thinking in three big groups, at least for the sake of conversation. One is the project inception, how we define a project, a P3 project, how we describe it, how we structure the P3 project. That's a very important part that really has changed a lot. The legal and commercial framework, and Carlos mentioned a bit about risk transfer and how it's by definition. There's a few details I'd like to touch here on things that we've seen. And finally, the process and deliver, how the procurement process works, how the process works, and how that it's also changing to get more successful, and what is the skills that we need to really get to the right place. So when we talk about rethinking the project inception, there are a few things that are really combined when talking about setting a project. It's how you select the project. Also, it's really important the project perception, political support, and the type of asset. Those three things, even though I put it in different columns, but they're completely interrelated. So for me, the perfect example on this is what we used to have 20 years ago. And 20 years ago, the typical P3, at least in the US, but in most of the places, it was a toll road, just stretch of highway that you're going to collect tolls. That wasn't really connected anywhere. It was from one place to another, but really not very well thought. There was not really any public engagement, every explaining how the project was going to be, any real collaboration with the market or anything. It was just something that happens. That a concessionaire, you get your tolls and you leave. Now that has changed completely. One of the first things that when you look at a project, the first question that you have to ask is, well, what do we want to solve? What is the need that we have in front of us? What is the issue that we want to resolve? That is the first question that we didn't have before. So now, a perfect example of that we've seen in many metro places in the US is, well, what you want to solve is traffic congestion, for example. That's the problem. You have a city that has a lot of traffic congestion problems, may have some socioeconomical developed areas that need to grow. There's maybe some underuse transportation methods that you need to give it a boost. So how you compile all of those things in something that makes sense, and at the end, the solution for that, it's a combined system where you have, for example, now managed lanes. Again, we don't name them toll roads anymore. I mean, that's a public perception. Those are managed lanes, choice lanes. You manage traffic. You don't pay a tax for the traffic. You have a long program of managed lanes. It's not just one project. You have a series of projects within 10, 15 years that you really sequence based on the growth of the city. You combine different other transportation modes within the same project. You have your managed lanes, but they include transit, they include bus services, you include all of those TODs or things that really help in developing different areas. You go and expose that to the public. You have public engagement, really people buying the project, understanding the project. That leads you to have political support for this project. And Carlos mentioned before, that's very important from the development of this project. It's long term. So having political support, having the people really understanding the benefit of the project, that is really important. So right now, we're looking at a different way to really come up with a P3 project. There are other opportunities in the US that are getting more traction. For example, the TODs, the transit-oriented development. Those are you identifying areas where there's a depressed part of a city, and probably what they need is there's no connection for that part of the city to either the downtown or business office areas or housing. So it's a combination of, well, let's get some sort of public transportation to that area. Let's improve the transit of the bus service. And what else you can do? Well, let's also develop from a housing, from a business, offices, commercial. Let's develop that area. So by developing that area, more people live there. By people living there, they will use the public transportation that will be also developed. So that cycle really help, as I said at the beginning, solving the problem. That is right now, when we look at P3s, we have to identify the need and how we solve the problem rather than taking from a pure transactional point of view on, I just want to get tolls in exchange of a service. Wait a minute. So the other part of how we are rethinking the P3 sits on the legal commercial framework, and Carlos did a great explanation, risk management, and the definition of P3, where the private owner bears the risk. I think there's a few things that have changed here that are very interesting. One is when we talk about risk. Right now we're moving from risk transfer to risk alignment. The project is not to push the risk or assigning the risk, is to manage the risk. It's who is the party that is more capable, more efficiently going to manage a risk. That is the benefit for the entire project, for the entire partnership. So now we're looking at risks that historically have been one-sided. Now they are shared by the private and the public side, and there are plenty of examples where this project normally they have a very important environmental process, permitting, things of that nature. Before, that was something that the private side has to deal with and take the risk of. Right now, that is shared between owner and private side, where there's an alignment on how to get those permits, because that is out of their control of both. So there's a better alignment. That happens the same thing with other aspects of these projects, like financing, change in the market, subsurface conditions, utilities, things of that nature. Right now, they are shared rather than one-sided. But for me, the other thing that really has changed, and I think it's very important, it's that the documents are becoming more adaptable frameworks rather than strict documents. And what I mean is, we're looking at 50 years contract at least. I mean, we have, in the case of Ferrovial, we have cases where the concessions are 99 years, which is unheard of, but it's still 50 years, 40 years, 60 years, a long term. So you need to make sure that your framework is adaptable, because things are going to change. You're going to have new technologies. You're going to have new policies. You're going to have changes on demand, maybe changes in politics, things of that nature. So it's important to have a framework that allows you to be flexible within time and have an understanding with the owner on how to resolve and how to adapt in those cases. Lastly, the last part of the process where we're rethinking is when we talk about the process, and in particular when we talk about the owner. And as you can see, what we had before were owners that they were very one-sided. They were looking to only one project. They were self-sufficient, and that was difficult to deal with. Now, with time and experience, we've seen owners that really, as I said, they don't look to a project, they look to a program, they look to a long-term process where they're going to be learning and having more projects and having a cycle so they can keep improving, but also they understand the need of other advisors, special consultants from a financing side, from a technical point of view, from an insurance, lending. So really surround them by a group of people so we all can talk the same language, we can have the same aligned conversation, and really you can start looking at this project on a transparent collaboration. So for me, the main takeaway of everything that has happened in the last years are what we are rethinking is really the partnership. That what has changed on our view. I mean, it's been always there. It's been always in the definition that Carlos very well pointed out on public-private partnership. But before was a very two-sided thing. It was the private versus the public, and there was nothing in between. Now, at least in the US, we have come with an understanding that we need to have that partnership. We need to have a trust collaboration. We need to have alignment. We have to have transparency. We have to understand each other and to really look at what are the needs to be able to resolve the problems and really put projects that make sense. At the end, right now it's not a question on whether a PPP project works. It's a question of how we deliver it more efficiently. So that concludes my part of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Javier. You have taken us through a journey that is very impressive as far as the evolution of the concept of PPPs is concerned in the US. And I think this is certainly a good introduction to our last speaker, Doris, because you have worked on a scheme and on a standard with UNECE that should be relevant, I would say, for any type of country, whether it's a developing country or an industrialized country. And we're looking forward to hearing from you what this standard contains and how you have been helping develop that. The floor is yours, Doris.
Un segundito, un instante nomás.
Just one second,
Acabamos
please,
en el
if you
chat
bear
de
with me. We
enviar
have
un
just shared
formulario.
on the chat
Le
a
pedimos
form
a la audiencia, por
for
favor,
the
que
audience.
complete
Please
ese
fill it in,
formulario.
if you will.
Eso nos
It's a form
permitirá
to register your
mantener el
attendance at the
contacto
webinar.
con quienes
This
han
will allow us
participado,
to keep in touch with
contestar las
everyone who has
preguntas que
connected,
queden
to answer
luego
any
de
questions
nuestro
that may remain
intercambio
unanswered
y
after the Q&A.
continuar la relación.
And to
Muchas
continue your
gracias. Perdón la
relationship, thank
interrupción.
you so
Adelante,
much. I'm
Doris.
sorry for the interruption. Doris, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I am trying to share my screen. I hope you can see it and put it as large as I can. Is that okay with all of you? Can see it? Yeah.
Good.
Fantastic. So thank you very much, Michelle. And it's quite difficult for me to come after my two distinguished colleagues and their very exciting presentation. So I'll do my best to bring also my expertise in PPPs, which I've been doing for the past 35 years. As you mentioned, Michelle, I am a civil work engineer, but from a time where ladies couldn't go on site, so I went finance. I went finance for large contractor groups, but also for the French PPP unit at the Ministry of Finance. And now I'm an independent consultant, so I can be an observer at the United Nation, at the European Economic Center for PPPs. I'm also an expert for European Commission. And it helps me dragging some conclusions on the PPPs. So the title of the webinar is Rethinking PPP. Basically, from years, there has been a lot of lessons learned. And as financiers, I would say that PPPs were mainly approached through one dominant question, which is the project bankable? And we were mostly looking only at that. And this created many of the problems which have been highlighted by Cesar and Javier, which basically are the problems that we all know. Are projects optimized for financial closure rather than operational success? Most of the cases. Excessive focus on risk transfer to excessive risk transfer. Underestimation of long-term social and political realities with government changes, local authority changes. Infrastructure technically delivered, but not always sustainably usable, affordable, or socially accepted. So in a nutshell, what the last decade has taught us is very simple. Infrastructure does not fall because of lack of money. This is very rare. It fails because projects are badly prepared, badly structured, or disconnected from long-term public needs. And this is precisely why the PPP for SDGs, as we said, is the United Nations, which is Sustainable Development Goals, why this approach emerged within the United Nations and sustain the works that we have been doing for the past 10 years. The mindset has really heavily changed from financing projects to designing a durable, sustainable system of public value. And this is quite important because it brought two shifts, I would say. The first one is shifting from value for money to value for people. So the real revolution of the UNICE approach is not financial, it's not finding a magic financing to finance project. This does not work. The revolution is conceptual. Let me explain further. In traditional PPPs, we were looking at value for money. That is, can the private sector finance or deliver this project? Can risk be transferred? And how far can they be transferred? Can lender be repaid? Is public money properly spent? When the UNICE came along with all those, I would say, bashing of the PPPs, which were becoming far too financial for the public governments to explain to taxpayers or to users, it brought something which is much broader, which is basically the question: does the project create sustainable value for society over its full life cycle, all the duration of the project? And as Javier said, and sometimes a project can last very long. We have railway projects in France which last about 50 years. So that's roughly 2 to 3 generations. So this is exactly what the standards that are drafted by the nations now define as value for people. And basically, it is based on 6 important pillars. The first one is access and affordability of the project. Anyone must have access to the project, and it should be affordable by any taxpayer, any users. The second one is an obvious one nowadays. It's the environmental sustainability. The third one is resilience. You do not build on a short-term basis. You build for the next generations. The fourth one is fiscal sustainability, and the population must be able to pay for it. The fifth one is one of the major points of the previous presentation, that's stakeholder inclusion. You need to include in the discussions all the stakeholders. I mean, you need to really build a partnership. And the sixth one is about control, because it is about performance. This is long-term and operational performance. So this 6 pillar brings quite a change and at least a new way to approach project structuration. Because once you change the objective, when you are thinking of sustainability and duration rather than only bankability, then you change the procurement design, the project design, the procurement logic, the financial structure, and even more the skills that are required both from public and private authority to complete the projects. So therefore, PPPs are not anymore a kind of procurement model, a procurement tool. It becomes a government model. And from that, it brings the second shift, which is a consequence of the first one. With this new approach, one of the most interesting approach of the UNICE work is that it translates the entire operational life of a project into legal and contractual thinking. They start to become more engineer, I would say, than financiers. The standard, which has been issued by the United Nations, is not only about procurement rules or concession clause. It is basically the legal translation of everything that can happen during the life of a PPP into a contract. And you've got to anticipate every stage of the project. That is preparation, the technology evolutions, for instance, the population demand changes, the political cycles, economic data such as inflation, climate resilience, renegotiations of the contract that, as mentioned by Cesar before me, the financial robustness for sure, the conflict between the stakeholders, or even more the contract termination that bears on the public side. So the recommendation in the standard document transform continuously operational realities into legal principles, governance mechanism, and contractual tools. So, because infrastructure is no longer viewed as a static asset and only as a static asset, but as a living one and on a long-term basis. And this is a major evolution in the apprehension of the infrastructure sector. And this requires quite a different mindset. This is less transactional, more adaptive, more interdisciplinary, and more collaborative. The purpose is not only to make a PPP, but to make a successful PPP. The purpose is not to lend money, invest money. The purpose is to create value on a long-term basis. So how did you do that? And what are these new projects requiring to be successful? The last decade told us one thing, is that successful PPPs are not, once again, a matter of finance. They are a matter of mindset, governance, execution capacity, and transparency. I would try to wrap up this requirement into the 5 major shifts that you see on the screen. The first obvious one, the first switch is switching from financing project to solving public needs. The first requirement is not where is the money, but what are the public needs. This is really the starting point. And we are now asking us if projects are genuinely answer a long-term public need or not. And when we say that, when thinking of now, immediately, I mean, for instance, if you look at the country at war, just like Ukraine and so on, you need to rebuild immediately. But once it would be rebuilt and the war will be over, I mean, the period will be peaceful, so you need to think tomorrow and also for the generation after that. So this sounds a bit obvious, but historically, many of the PPPs were structured around bankability first, which pushed to our main topics in PPP and projects disconnected from the users, all the taxpayers, and basically become over times politically non-robust, operationally sometimes weak, and financially for sure very unstable. So this approach, which is recommended by the United Nations, reverses the logic. Public usefulness comes first, which creates long-term robustness because you create an asset which has a value, and that basically broaden the attractiveness for the financial sector. It's far more easy to finance something which is robust than something that might become robust. The second switch is about changing from construction logic to life cycle logic. Infrastructure is no longer viewed only at the construction phase. We look at the service which is rendered to the public, and construction becomes then a way to achieve it. So it changes the terms in the contracts for the contractors. There are more obligations linked to the long-term basis and to the service to be rendered. For instance, also the interfaces contract have dramatically changed. They are interfaces contract between operation and constructions. And the project is really viewed as a 20, 50 years system nowadays. So therefore, as Javier mentioned, the way projects are designed have changed. And we now draw the attention on parts which were not our priority 10 years ago. So that's basically things like maintenance. Maintenance matters from day one. Adaptability also matters. Operational monitoring, data collection, performance matters. Technological evolutions are to be anticipated, demographic also situations, and this brings far more resilience to the projects. So basically, to wrap up to the key questions, we would say now, will this infrastructure still create value in 20 years? And not simply can we build it on time and at cost, which were our common thinking 10 years ago. So let's switch to the third pillar, which is a risk transfer. We used to transfer risk as much as we could when we were on the government side, so to pass much of the risk to the private sector, to the sponsors, to the contractors, and the better balance sheet they had to cope up with the risk transfer, the better it was. That brought issues with competitions, that brought issues also by solving the problems, because the balance sheet is not a mean to solve issue. What solved issues is the competencies of the contracting and operating company. And this new mindset is therefore translated into all the phases of the documentation. So switching now to the fourth one, the switch from static contract to adaptive governance. I mean, this is for my legal friends, basically. On traditional PPPs, we often assume that the world will remain stable for decades, and if we had a good security package, that would be fine. But I mean, we all face the changes in the contracts because we've got all many years of contracts behind us. Inflations, climate, technologies, behaviors, politics, and energy, or new technologies emerging. Therefore, successful PPPs nowadays require data collection, monitoring mechanism, comparison, capacity building, contractual flexibility. We need contracts which are flexible, that allow renegotiation at low cost, if possible. Dispute prevention system, we do not want to go at court. And we need strong public contract management capacities, fast track decision process. We do not want to wait long for the government to decide on a project. The last switch is from purely legal drafting attitude to multidisciplinary strategy advisory. And this has been also mentioned in the previous speech, but this is probably one of the biggest changes for legal professionals themselves. Traditionally, many lawyers involved in PPP focused mainly on contractual security, security package, risk matrix, allocation and cap of liabilities, and procurement compliance, relationship between shareholders, or any financial projections that we could draw, sensitivities, and so on that. Today, the roles of the advisor is much broader. Whether you are advising government, public authorities, lenders, sponsors, investors, you as legal advisor increasingly need to understand how works the operational reality, the infrastructure performance, where is the performance, what are the key criteria of performance. You need to understand the SDG constraints. You need to understand the long-term fiscal sustainability. And I see that in the audience, we've got my friend Vincent Piron, who is a master at fiscal demonstration. We've got stakeholder management also, because this is not just a team of doing PPPs. This is a team to be managed so that the project is successful. So in other words, PPP and infrastructure lawyers, advisors, counsels are no longer drafting contracts. They are increasingly helping structure the to get a long-term balance, and namely for a complex infrastructure system. This changes our works because the questions are no longer, is the contract legally robust, but much more, will this project remain operationally, politically, socially, and financially sustainable over the next 30 years. So before I conclude, let me just use some words about what is UNICE, because I mean, we mentioned this organization, and it's quite important to understand what it is used for and what it can bring. The UNICE is not a consulting platform or not a lobby organization. It's one of the regional commissions of the United Nations, and within the UNECE, the Working Party on PPP brings together public persons, governments, multinational institutions, NGOs, and private expert and practitioner. And what is quite unique is the way the work is produced, the standards and the guides, and there are sector guides about finance, no corruptions. I mean, in any topics, railroads. I mean, you can find it on the site. I will give the link on the site, and they have been built by working groups, years of discussions, a lot of public consultations, technical review, pilot experience, and continuous debates between practitioner and public sector from a lot of jurisdictions. It's quite open. All of you can participate to those work, and I do encourage you, I mean, to have your word and give your experience, because this is a way, I mean, you are more and more on the ground and you progress. Important to say that all experts and practitioners are working on a pro bono basis to guarantee the independence and the work. And so basically, this kind of guides took 9 to 2 years of work, sometimes more, depending on the complexity and the political sensibility. The validation process is technical and diplomatic. This is important because it creates texts that are operationally credible, legally usable, and internationally acceptable. Another important point about UNECE texts is that they are voluntary. There is no mandatory obligation use of these texts. This is not a binding law or whatever. But despite this, they have a very strong influence because they are very pragmatic, and governments use them as reform references, drafting inspirations for PPP laws, procurement guidance, capacity building tools a lot. And it brings, as Javier said, common language between government and investors that do accelerate the transactions and the implementation of the projects. So in practice, many of the governments use those works to structure their PPP units, to structure their stakes, to launch their procurement, to standardize the contract, to strengthen the anti-corruption safeguards also, to integrate the ESG criteria, because that's not an easy one, and to improve the preparation methodology and all the performance criteria. And this may be one of the most valuable aspects of the network. It creates a space where public and private sector can collectively transform accumulated international experience into practical and very efficient governance tools. So over the past 10 years at the Bureau, we really started from scratch to these very operational guides and ecosystem that help in delivering sustainable infrastructure everywhere on the planet. So just to conclude, I mean, because the title of our webinar is Rethinking PPPs, I would have a final thought. Just please remember that global liquidity exists, private capital exists, technical expertise exists. The bottleneck is different. The bottleneck is in the preparations, governance quality, institutional capacity, and the ability to structure infrastructure on a long-term resilience. And basically, this is definitely an expertise and a job, I would say full-time job. So when we speak about rethinking PPPs, which is the title of our webinar, we are actually speaking about rethinking the way that all together we design and we create public value itself for ourselves, but also for the next generation. And this is perhaps the most important shift of the last decade, moving for infrastructure as an asset to infrastructure as a long-term social, economic, and environmental system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doris. I am a bit frustrated for two reasons. The first one is that we had planned to stop at well, now actually at 4:15, so it's probably time to wrap up now. I'm a bit frustrated also because we had some very good presentations, and unfortunately we will not have time for a Q&A session, but I want to thank Fernando, who mentioned that there are some questionnaires or forms that are distributed. And please, if you feel as frustrated as I am and you would like to have some more developments based on the excellent presentations we had from our three speakers, do not hesitate to fill in those forms, to send them to us, and mention if you wanted us to elaborate a bit more on some of the topics that we touch very, very briefly. Do not hesitate to share your opinion with us, and at CICA we will try to accommodate your wishes and possibly to make some complementary webinars to deal with your request. I want to thank you again, thank the participants, thank the excellent speakers, Fernando, would you have something to add?
Simplemente muchas gracias a los
Simply thank
speakers,
you
muchas
to all
gracias
of
a
our
la
speakers.
audiencia.
Thank you to the
Y
audience.
sí, le insisto en que
And I
completen
will
el
insist,
formulario
please
enviado
fill the
en
form
el
that we
chat.
sent on the
Eso nos
chat.
permitirá mantener el
That will allow
contacto,
us to
contestar
stay in
preguntas,
touch, to answer questions,
programar nuestros
to
próximos
schedule
webinars en
our
base
next
al interés
webinars
de cada
and to
uno de
tailor
ustedes
them
o de
to
todos
your
ustedes.
interests.
Me atrevo a proponer
I dare
un
suggest
posible
a
webinar
possible
futuro.
webinar for the future,
¿Cuál va a ser el impacto
which will
sobre
be
los
the impact
contratos de
on
PPP
PPP
existentes,
contracts, on
de
existing
la
PPP contracts,
inflación,
of
del
the
quiebre de las
inflation,
cadenas de
of
suministro
the
y de
ruptures
algunos
in the supply
eventos
chains, and of
geopolíticos
geopolitical
que no
events
estaban previstos en los
that
contratos?
were not foreseen in the
Ojalá
contracts.
podamos
Hopefully,
hacer un
we
webinar
can organize a
sobre esos
webinar
aspectos. Creo
about
que son
those
de
topics. I
interés actual.
think these are
Dicho esto,
current
muchas
topics
gracias
that will
a los
interest everyone. Having
participantes
said
y
this,
nada
thank you
más.
again
Muchas
to all of our participants, and that's it on my side. Oh, wait,
Esta sesión ha sido
this session
grabada
has been
en inglés y
recorded
en
in
español.
English and in
En
Spanish.
algunas horas va a estar
In a few
disponible las
hours, it will
grabaciones
be available
y también
online,
van a estar disponibles
and
las
also we will
presentaciones.
have the presentations
Traduciremos
available.
las
We
presentaciones
will
al español
translate
para
them
nuestra
into
audiencia
Spanish for our
latinoamericana
Latin
o de habla
American
hispana,
audience,
para que todos tengan
so
acceso
that
a lo
everyone
dicho
can
y que
access
podamos
what has been
compartir
said, and
inquietudes y
so that we can
propuestas
share
a través
questions
de
and proposals
esta relación. Muchas gracias
through
a
the
todos.
relationship we are
Gracias,
building.
Fernando.
Thank you,
Cuídense.
everyone. Thank you, Fernando. Take care.
Gracias.